Have you ever taken the time to consider what goes on in your brain?
Have you considered what happens to make you play an instrument or write a paper so well?
Well, it's not all magic. There are certain parts of your brain that are specialized for certain tasks.
These parts of your brain are called lobes.
As the picture depicts, there are 4 lobes and each is responsible for a different set of tasks.
We will now discuss each of these very important lobes.
The frontal lobe, as its name suggests, is located near the front of the brain.
This lobe is responsible for movement. It receives information from the other lobes and utilizes it to create body movements.
Planning, organizing, problem-solving, and reasoning are associated with the frontal lobe as well.
The frontal lobe can be divided into subsections: the prefrontal cortex in the front and the premotor and motor areas in the back.
The prefrontal cortex determines personality and controls cognitive functions, while the motor and premotor areas are primarily concerned with movement.
Unfortunately, the frontal lobe's position renders it particularly vulnerable to damage. Damage to the frontal lobe can result in
alteration in talking habits, changes in problem-solving ability, and vulnerability to distractions.
So, do be careful with your frontal lobe. Next up is the parietal lobe.
The parietal lobe is located in the middle section of the brain and is all about sensory perception related to touch. It processes pressure, feel, and pain, among other things.
Other functions of the parietal lobe include information processing, recognition, and speech.
The parietal lobe is surrounded by the lateral sulcus, the central sulcus, the parieto-occipital sulcus, and the medial longitudinal fissure.
Here's a quick fact: the medial longitudinal fissure actually divides the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
The parietal lobe, upon damage, can cause complications. Problems with verbal memory, eye gaze, and language are associated with parietal lobe damage.
In any case, it's imperative that you avoid such damage.
Our discussion shifts to the temporal lobe, which is located in the bottom section of the brain.
The temporal lobe can be divided into the right and left temporal lobes as shown in the diagram.
The right lobe controls visual memory, which is, for example, remembering someone's face after meeting them. The left temporal lobe controls verbal memory, which can be found when memorizing vocabulary or in other similar actions.
The primary auditory cortex is located in this lobe. It sounds complicated, but this cortex is simply responsible for interpreting the sounds and language we hear.
A very important part of your brain is located in the temporal lobe called the hippocampus.
The hippocampus is responsible for your memories. The formation of long-term memory and the sorting of new information are related to the hippocampus. Damage to the temporal lobe varies depending on which section is affected.
Right temporal lobe damage can result in problems with recognizing previously seen drawings and visual content. This would make sense, seeing as the right temporal lobe's functions are related to visual memory.
Damage to the left temporal lobe can cause problems with remembering words and verbal material. As you can see, this damage is also related to the left temporal lobe's function.
The final lobe we will discuss is the occipital lobe.
The occipital lobe is located at the back portion of the brain. Fun fact: the occipital lobe is actually the smallest of all the lobes. The main job of the occipital lobe is to interpret information related to vision.
The occipital lobe contains the primary visual cortex, which is responsible for visual perception and sight. The cortex interprets information from the retinas in the eyes.
Because the occipital lobe is concerned with vision and sight, disorders affecting it are also related to sight.
As you can see, the occipital lobe is positioned towards the back of the brain, so it is not too vulnerable to injury.
However, disorders in the occipital lobe can result in illusions, some vision loss,
and difficulty recognizing words, colors, and objects. These disorders are related in some part to the eyes, as you can observe.
Although damaging your occipital lobe is rare, its consequences are not too pretty.
Alright. We've gone over the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. Before we conclude, here are a few quick facts about the lobes to jog your hippocampus. We hope this was a learning experience for you. Keep thinking about the lobes and don't forget to ask questions about yourself and your workings as well as those of the world.
Until next time. Keep thinking and keep learning.